I stared at the confirmation screen until my eyes burned. Balance, $0. After 5 years of double shifts, canceled vacations, and eating instant ramen alone in my apartment, I had finally done it. I had paid off the last cent of my parents' $680,000 mortgage. I wasn't expecting a parade. I just wanted a thank you. I wanted to feel like I finally mattered to them. My phone rang. It was my father, Thomas. I picked up, a smile already forming on my face. "Hey, Dad. Did you see the email? It's done." His voice was cold, flat, and steady. It was the voice he reserved for business deals, not his daughter. "I know you paid off the mortgage, Avery," he said. "All of it. But we're gifting the house to your brother." The air left my lungs. "What?" "Caleb needs the stability," he continued, as if discussing the weather. "And don't bother coming to the celebration dinner tonight. We don't need your attitude ruining your brother's big moment." The line went dead. He thought he had crushed me. He thought I would cry in the dark. But staring at my silent phone, I didn't feel sad. I felt something dangerous wake up inside me. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from? I grew up in a house where the volume of your voice determined your worth. And in the Monroe household in Rochester, New York, my father, Thomas, was the only one allowed to hold the microphone. Our house was a 2-story colonial on a street lined with maples. From the outside, it looked perfect. The lawn was always cut on diagonal lines, exactly how my father liked it. The shutters were painted a crisp navy blue. But inside, the air was always thin, like there wasn't enough oxygen for 4 people. There was my father, the king of his own small kingdom. He worked in sales, a job that required him to be charming to strangers and exhausted for his family. He liked things a certain way. Dinner at 6. No noise during the news. And most importantly, total adoration from the people who lived under his roof. Then there was my mother, Evelyn. She was a ghost in her own life. She moved through the rooms quietly, touching furniture, straightening magazines, always checking the temperature of the room to see if my father was about to explode. Her job wasn't to be a mother. Her job was to be a buffer. She smoothed over rough edges. She made excuses. "He's just tired, Avery," she would say. "Don't poke the bear." And then there was Caleb. My brother Caleb was 2 years younger than me, but he took up all the space in the room. He was the future of the family. That's what Dad called him. When Caleb learned to tie his shoes, it was a headline event. When I brought home straight, as it was expected, I learned very quickly that there were 2 sets of rules. If Caleb broke a vase playing ball in the house, it was an accident. "Boys will be boys," Dad would chuckle, clapping him on the shoulder. If I left a glass on the coffee table without a coaster, it was a sign of disrespect. "Do you think I work this hard so you can ruin my furniture?" Dad would snap, his face turning that dark shade of red that made my stomach knot. I became the invisible child. It was a survival tactic. If I was quiet, if I was perfect, if I didn't ask for anything, I wouldn't get yelled at. I wouldn't be the target. I remember my 16th birthday. I had been excited about it for months. I didn't want a party, just a nice dinner. Maybe Italian food. I woke up that morning and went downstairs, my heart doing a little happy flutter. Mom was at the stove frying bacon. Dad was drinking coffee, reading the paper. Caleb was slouching over a bowl of cereal. "Morning," I said, waiting. "Morning," Dad grunted, not looking up. Mom turned and smiled, but it was a distracted, nervous smile. "Morning, honey. Can you grab the milk?" Caleb finished the jug. I walked to the fridge, the cold air hitting my face. No happy birthday. No balloons. No cards on the table. I sat down. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. They talked about Caleb's soccer practice. They talked about the car needing an oil change. They talked about the weather. Finally, I couldn't take it. "It's my birthday," I said softly. Dad lowered the paper. He looked at me over his reading glasses, annoyed that I had interrupted. "We know, Avery. We're going to celebrate it next weekend. Caleb has a tournament tonight. But it's today," I said. My voice trembled. "Don't be selfish," Dad said, snapping the paper back up. "Your brother's team is in the finals. We can't be in 2 places at once, and we certainly aren't going to skip his game for pasta." I looked at Mom. She was wiping the counter, scrubbing a spot that wasn't dirty. She didn't look at me. She never did when Dad made a ruling. That night, they went to the game. I stayed home and made myself a grilled cheese sandwich. I ate it in the silence of the kitchen, listening to the clock tick. That was the night I stopped expecting them to change. I threw myself into school after that. My grades were my armor. I joined the debate team, not because I liked arguing, but because it was the only place where people had to listen to me speak for 3 minutes without interrupting. I worked part-time at a diner on weekends, saving every dollar in a shoebox under my bed. I needed an escape route. Caleb, meanwhile, floated through life. He barely passed his classes, but Dad blamed the teachers. They don't understand his learning style, Dad insisted. When Caleb got caught drinking behind the bleachers, Dad blamed the other kids. He's a leader, they follow him. He just got caught in the crossfire. Caleb never faced a consequence he couldn't charm or whine his way out of. And because he never faced consequences, he never grew up. He stayed a child, just in a bigger body. When I got my acceptance letter to a university in Chicago, I felt like I had won a war. I put the letter on the kitchen table. I got in, I said, with a partial scholarship. Dad looked at the tuition cost remaining. We can't help you with this, Avery. The business is tight right now, and we have to save for Caleb's college. He's looking at private schools. I know, I said. I didn't ask for money. I have savings. I'll work. I just wanted you to know I'm going. Good, Dad said. Just don't come crying to us when it gets too hard. I left 2 months later. I packed my life into the trunk of a used Honda Civic I'd bought with my diner money. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house. I looked at the perfectly cut lawn. I looked at the window of my room, which was already being converted into a gaming room for Caleb. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I will never need you, I whispered to the windshield. I will never ask you for a single thing. I will never owe you a dime. For years, I kept that promise. I worked through college. I took loans. I ate cheap food. I graduated and got a job as a project manager at a logistics firm. I was good at it because I was used to managing chaos and keeping my emotions out of it. I built a life, a quiet, sturdy life. I had my own apartment. I paid my own bills. I didn't visit home often. When I did, it was short. A holiday dinner here, a birthday there. It was always the same. Caleb was the star, struggling to find himself, while living in the basement. Dad was the loud, boasting king. Mom was the shadow. I thought I was free. I thought I had escaped the gravity of that house. But the thing about family is that they install the buttons that control you. And even when you think you've disabled them, the wiring is still there, deep under the skin. They didn't need to ask me for help. They just needed to be drowning, and my instinct, the instinct of the invisible child who just wanted to be useful, would kick in. I thought I was strong. I didn't know that my desire to finally be the good daughter who saved the day was a weakness they would exploit until there was nothing left of me. It was 5 years ago when the illusion of my parents' perfect life finally cracked. I had come home for Thanksgiving. I wasn't planning to stay long, just drive in on Thursday morning, eat the turkey, endure the questions about why I wasn't married yet, and drive back on Friday. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, but tired. The navy blue shutters were peeling. The grass was a little long. It wasn't like Dad to let things slide. Inside, the house felt heavy. There was a tension in the air, a thick, static silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. Avery. Mom chirped when I walked in, giving me a hug that felt frail. She felt thinner. You made good time. Traffic wasn't bad, I said. Where's Dad? In the den, watching the game with Caleb. Of course. I went into the kitchen to help Mom. She was manic, moving too fast, dropping spoons, laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. Is everything okay, Mom? I asked, leaning against the counter. Fine. Everything is fine. Just prices, you know? The turkey was so expensive this year. Everything goes up. She waved a hand dismissively, but I saw her hand shaking. Later that afternoon, I needed a battery for my car key fob. Check the junk drawer. Mom yelled from the living room. I pulled open the drawer next to the fridge. It was the universal junk drawer. Every family has loose change, rubber bands, takeout menus, screwdrivers. But underneath the clutter, jammed into the back, was a stack of envelopes. They weren't regular mail. They had red bold text on the front. Urgent. Final notice. Past due. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked over my shoulder. Dad and Caleb were cheering at the TV in the other room. Mom was upstairs changing. I pulled the stack out. My hands were trembling. I opened the top one. It was from the bank. Notice of default. I opened the next one. Intent to foreclose. I felt sick. I quickly did the math in my head. They hadn't paid the mortgage in 6 months. There were late fees, penalties, interest piling on top of interest. The total amount due to stop the foreclosure was staggering. The total balance remaining on the house was $680,000. They had refinanced a few years ago, pulling out equity, and now they were underwater. Avery? What are you doing? I jumped. Mom was standing in the doorway. Her face went pale when she saw the letters in my hand. Mom, I whispered. What is this? She rushed over and snatched them from me, shoving them back into the drawer as if they were radioactive. It's nothing, she hissed. Don't tell your father you saw those. He'll be humiliated. Humiliated? I stared at her. Mom, they're going to take the house. You're months behind. How did this happen? She slumped against the counter, covering her face with her hands. The business, it hasn't been doing well. Your father won't admit it. He keeps thinking the next big deal is around the corner. And we helped Caleb. You helped Caleb? I repeated. He got into some trouble. Credit cards, a car accident. We had to bail him out. We refinanced the house to pay his debts, and then the payments went up and the business went down, and she started to cry, silent, heaving sobs. I looked at the closed door of the den. I could hear Dad laughing. I could hear Caleb shouting at the referee on the screen. They were in there playing make-believe. They were pretending they were still the successful family, while Mom was in the kitchen hiding foreclosure notices in the junk drawer. I felt a surge of anger. I should have walked away. I should have gotten in my car, driven back to Chicago, and let them face the consequences of their own actions. Caleb was 26 years old. Dad was a grown man. But then I looked at Mom. She looked so small. And I looked around the kitchen. This was the house I grew up in. Even if it was a cold house, it was our house. It was the only history I had. And deep down, a sick, twisted part of me thought, if I fix this, they will finally see me. If I saved them, I wouldn't be the invisible child anymore. I would be the hero. I would be the one they respected. Dad would have to look me in the eye and say, "Thank you, Avery. We couldn't have done it without you." How much? I asked. Mom looked up, her eyes red. What? How much to catch up? To stop the bank? Avery, no. It's too much. It's $18,000 just to stop the process. And then the monthly payments. We can't make them. I took a deep breath. I had savings. I had been saving for a down payment on a condo for myself. It was my freedom fund. I have the $18,000, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Mom grabbed my hands. Her grip was desperate. You would do that? Avery, oh my God. You would save us. I'll pay the arrears, I said, my mind already racing, calculating budgets. And I'll take over the monthly payments. But Dad has to know. We need to be honest. Mom's face hardened. No. You can't tell him you're paying. It would break him, Avery. He's a proud man. If he knows his daughter is bailing him out, it will destroy his spirit. He's already so depressed. So what? I just pay and he thinks, what? That the money fell from the sky. I'll tell him the bank made a mistake. Or that the business accounts finally cleared. Please, Avery. Just for a little while. Let him keep his dignity. For me. She looked at me with those pleading eyes. For the first time in my life, I held the power. She needed me. Fine, I said. But I'm handling the mortgage directly. I'm not giving you cash to give to Caleb. Of course, of course. She hugged me. I stood stiffly in her arms. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck to the ceiling when I was 10. I did the math again. My salary was good, but it wasn't a fortune. To pay my own rent, my own bills, and their massive mortgage, I would have to strip my life down to the bone. No vacations, no eating out, no new clothes, no buying my own condo. I was signing up for prison, a financial prison. The next morning, I called the bank. I spoke to a loan officer. I authorized the transfer of $18,000 from my savings account to the Monroe mortgage account. Transaction approved. The voice on the line said, I watched the money vanish from my app. 5 years of saving. Gone in a second. I walked downstairs. Dad was eating pancakes. He looked happy. Morning, Avery, he boomed. Great day, huh? I have a good feeling about this week. I think things are turning around. He had no idea. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care how the miracle happened, as long as he didn't have to admit he failed. Yeah, Dad, I said, pouring myself black coffee. Great day. I looked at Caleb. He was texting, ignoring everyone. He was wearing a new watch. I felt a knot of resentment tighten in my stomach. I was about to bleed myself dry to keep a roof over their heads, and they would never even know it was my blood. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was the right thing to do. That's what family does, right? We sacrifice. I didn't know then that sacrifice without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction. I drove back to Chicago that evening. The highway was gray and endless. I turned off the radio and drove in silence. I felt heavier. I felt older. My life as an independent woman was over. I was back in their web. But this time, I wasn't the child asking for attention. I was the pillar holding up the ruins. And I naively thought that the weight of the house would be the heaviest thing I would have to carry. I was wrong. The secrets were heavier. The next 5 years were a blur of gray walls, fluorescent lights, and cheap coffee. I stopped living my own life. I became a machine designed for one purpose, to transfer money from Chicago to Rochester. I created a spreadsheet. I called it the project. Every month, on the 1st, the mortgage payment was due. It was $3,200. That was more than my own rent. It was more than most people earned in a month. To make it happen, I took a second job. I didn't tell anyone at my main office. By day, I was a project manager, wearing blazers and sitting in meetings about supply chains. By night and on weekends, I did freelance data entry and transcription work from my laptop. I worked until my eyes watered and my fingers cramped. My friends stopped calling after the first year. Come out with us, Avery. It's Friday, they would say. I can't, I would reply. I have work. You always have work, they said. Eventually, they stopped asking. I watched their lives unfold on social media. I saw them go to Mexico, get married, buy houses, have babies. I was stuck in a time loop, running on a treadmill that was set too fast. My apartment in Chicago became a storage unit for a person who didn't exist anymore. I stopped using the heater in the winter to save on electric bills. I wore layers of sweaters and sat under blankets, typing away while my breath fogged in the air. I ate pasta with butter 5 nights a week. When I wanted to treat myself, I added a can of tuna. Every time I transferred the money, I felt a physical pain in my chest. That was my future going down the drain. That was my retirement. That was my safety. But then I would call home. How are things, Mom? I would ask, trying to sound casual. Oh, much better, she would say, her voice light and airy. Your father is in such a good mood. He took us out to a steak dinner last night. We celebrated Caleb getting a call back for that sales job. I would look at my bowl of plain noodles. That's great, Mom. He put it on the credit card, but he says he has a handle on things now. He says the house is his anchor. He feels so secure knowing he's keeping a roof over our heads. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall. He wasn't keeping a roof over their heads. I was. Does he know? I would ask. Does he know I sent the payment? Sure, she would whisper, her tone changing instantly. No. I told him the bank lowered the rate because of his long-standing credit history. He was so proud, Avery. He walked around the house saying, see? They respect loyalty. Please don't ruin it for him. He just needs to feel like the man of the house. And what about Caleb? I asked. Is he working? He's trying, she defended. He needs the right opportunity. He's not like you, Avery. He's creative. He needs inspiration. He bought a new camera equipment set. He's going to be a photographer. With what money? Well, your father helped him. An investment in his future. I hung up. I sat in the dark. I cried until my throat hurt, and then I opened my laptop and went back to work. This went on for 60 months. There were moments I almost broke, like the time my car broke down on the freeway in the middle of a snowstorm. The mechanic told me it would cost $800 to fix the transmission. I didn't have $800. I had sent every spare penny to the mortgage. I stood in the freezing garage, shivering, and called my dad. I just wanted to hear him say he would help. I wanted him to be a father. Dad, I'm stuck, I said, my teeth chattering. My car died. I need a loan, just for a few weeks. A loan, he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Avery, you have a good job. You should manage your money better. If you stopped buying those expensive coffees, maybe you'd have an emergency fund. I can't bail you out every time you make a mistake. We have expenses here. I hung up on him. I left my car at the shop. I took the bus for 3 months until I could afford the repair. I hated them. I truly did. But I couldn't stop paying. It was like a sickness. I had convinced myself that if I finished the mortgage, if I got that balance to zero, the dynamic would change. I would present them with the deed. I would say, I did this. And they would have to bow down. They would have to apologize. The day finally came. It was a Tuesday. I logged into the bank portal. Remaining balance, $3,215.44. I had exactly $3,220 in my account. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was it. The end of the tunnel. I clicked pay. A little green checkmark appeared. Paid in full. I sat back in my cheap office chair. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I expected fireworks. I expected a feeling of triumph. Instead, I just felt empty. I felt drained. I picked up my phone. I texted Mom. It's done. The mortgage is paid off. Zero balance. She replied 3 minutes later with a thumbs up emoji. That was it. A thumbs up. Then, 2 hours later, the phone call came. The call where my father told me they were gifting the house to Caleb. The call where he told me not to come to the party. He didn't know I had paid it off. He thought he had done it. He thought his shrewd business moves and bank loyalty had cleared the debt. Mom had never told him. She had let him believe his own fantasy for 5 years. And because he thought he owned it, he thought he had the right to give it away. You're not invited, he had said. Don't bring your attitude. I looked at the phone. I looked at the green checkmark on my computer screen. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge collapsing. I stood up. I walked to my closet. I pulled out the only nice dress I owned, a black cocktail dress I hadn't worn in 4 years. It was a little loose now because I had lost weight from stress. I packed a bag. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to Rochester. The drive from Chicago to Rochester takes about 9 hours. I drove it in 8. I didn't listen to music. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I screamed at the windshield. I cried. Then I dried my face and kept driving. I arrived in my hometown just as the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple. The air smelled like cut grass and humidity. I turned onto Maple Street. I saw the house from 2 blocks away. It was glowing. My parents, who claimed they had no money for my college, no money for my car repairs, and no money for the mortgage, had apparently found money for a party. There were string lights wrapped around every tree in the front yard. There was a white tent set up on the lawn. Expensive cars were lined up along the curb. BMWs, Mercedes, Lexus. My father's friends. The business associates he tried so hard to impress. I parked my battered Honda Civic down the street, hidden behind a large oak tree. I didn't want them to see me coming. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were cold. My face was pale. I put on red lipstick. It felt like war paint. I walked toward the house. The sound of jazz music drifted through the air. I could hear laughter. The clinking of glasses. I walked up the driveway. No one stopped me. The front door was wide open. I stepped inside. The foyer was filled with flowers. Huge arrangements of lilies and roses. I moved into the living room. It was packed. There were probably 50 people there. My cousins, neighbors, my father's golf buddies. And there, in the center of the room, standing by the fireplace, was the royal family. My father, Thomas, was wearing a new suit. He looked tan and healthy. He was holding a glass of scotch, beaming. My mother, Evelyn, was wearing a shimmering silver dress. She was clinging to his arm, smiling that nervous, fragile smile. And Caleb, my brother, was sitting in Dad's favorite armchair, looking like a prince on his throne. He was wearing a casual blazer, no tie, looking effortlessly bored. I stood in the back of the room, in the shadows of the hallway. No one noticed me. I was the invisible child, after all. I was good at this. My father tapped a spoon against his glass. The room went quiet. "Attention, everyone," he boomed. His voice filled the room. It was the voice of a man who believed his own lies. "Thank you all for coming." He put an arm around Caleb's shoulders. "We are here tonight to celebrate a milestone," Dad said. "As you all know, the last few years have been challenging for the economy. But the Monroe family doesn't quit. We don't buckle under pressure." A few people murmured in agreement. "Hear, hear." "I have worked night and day to keep this family secure," Dad continued. "I have made sacrifices you wouldn't believe. But today, I am proud to announce that the family home, this house that we built our memories in, is officially paid off." Applause broke out. Mom clapped the hardest, her eyes wide and panicked. She scanned the room, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Dad raised a hand to quiet them. "And," he said, his voice dropping to a sentimental register, "Mom and I have made a decision. We want to pass the torch. We want to ensure the legacy continues. So, as a graduation gift, a little late, but well-deserved, we are gifting the deed of this house to our son, Caleb. Caleb stood up, grinning. He did a mock bow. Thanks, Pop, he said. I'll take good care of it. Bachelor pad. Here we come. The room laughed. Men slapped Caleb on the back. Good for you, son. My blood turned to ice. They were giving him my life. They were giving him my sweat, my skipped meals, my 5 years of hell. And they were laughing about it. I took a step forward. I was about to scream. I was about to burn the house down with my words. But suddenly, a voice cut through the applause. It was sharp, dry, and loud. That's funny, Thomas. The room went deadly silent. Everyone turned. Standing near the buffet table was my Uncle Harold, Mom's brother. Uncle Harold was the black sheep of the family because he was honest. He was a retired accountant. He didn't care about appearances. He wore a rumpled suit and held a deviled egg in one hand. Harold? Dad said, his smile faltering. What's funny? Harold took a bite of the egg, chewed slowly, and swallowed. He looked bored. It's funny, Harold said, because I'm the trustee on the estate paperwork. Remember? You made me sign it 10 years ago so you could dodge some tax liability. This isn't the time for technicalities, Harold, Dad snapped. We're celebrating. We are, Harold asked. He set his plate down. Because I was looking at the trust documents this morning. I got a notification from the bank. And according to the trust, the ownership of the house is tied to the payer of the mortgage. Dad laughed nervously. Yes, well, that's me. I paid the mortgage. Harold shook his head. No, Tom, you didn't. The silence in the room was heavy now. Uncomfortable. Guests started looking at their shoes. I saw the transaction logs, Harold said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. For the last 5 years, the payments haven't come from your account. They came from a checking account in Chicago. Harold turned his head. He looked straight into the shadows of the hallway where I was standing. They came from Avery. Every head in the room turned. I felt like a spotlight had hit me. I stepped out of the shadows. My father's face went white, then red, then purple. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Caleb looked confused. Avery? What is she doing here? Dad said she wasn't coming. I walked into the center of the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I didn't look at the guests. I looked straight at my father. Hello, Dad, I said. My voice was calm, scary calm. Nice party. Avery, Dad hissed. What is this? What are you doing? I'm here for the celebration, I said. Uncle Harold is right. I paid the mortgage, every cent, for 5 years. While you were investing in Caleb, I was paying for the roof over your head. Liar, Caleb shouted. Dad paid it. He told me. Your dad lies, I said, looking at Caleb. And Mom covers for him. I looked at Mom. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Avery, please, she mouthed. Not here. Not now. Yes, here, I said. Yes, now. I turned back to Dad. You told me not to come. You told me I wasn't invited to the party for the house I bought. You wanted to give my house to him. I pointed at Caleb. It's family money, Dad shouted, trying to regain control. It doesn't matter who transferred it. It's all one pot. You're my daughter. You help the family. That's your duty. My duty. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. My duty was to be invisible. My duty was to fix your mistakes so you could pretend you were a big man. Get out. Dad roared. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. Get out of my house. That's the problem, Thomas, Uncle Harold said from the corner, his voice amused. Technically, it's not your house. Dad looked like he was having a stroke. He looked at Harold, then at me, then at the silent, staring guests. Everyone go home, Dad screamed. Party's over. Get out. The guests scrambled. They grabbed their purses and coats, avoiding eye contact, rushing for the door. It was chaos. In 2 minutes, the room was empty except for the 5 of us. Me, Mom, Dad, Caleb, and Uncle Harold. Dad marched up to me. He was breathing hard. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate me, just like he did when I was a child. You think you're smart, he spat. You think you can embarrass me in front of my friends? You're ungrateful. Selfish. I should have disowned you years ago. You did, I said. You just forgot to stop taking my money. I will fix this, he snarled. I will call the lawyers. I will get that title transferred to Caleb if it's the last thing I do. You won't see a dime of equity. This is my house. We'll see, I said. I looked at Mom. She was sobbing into her hands. She didn't look up. She didn't defend me. She stayed exactly where she always was, in his shadow. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. I turned and walked out. I walked past Uncle Harold.
He winked at me.
"Call Jordan Fields," he whispered as I passed. "He's the best lawyer in the city. I already sent him the trust files." "Thanks, Uncle Harold," I whispered back. I walked out the front door, past the slowly deflating balloons, past the half-eaten trays of shrimp. I got into my car. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't put the key in the ignition. I sat there for 10 minutes just breathing. I had done it. I had blown up the family. I looked at the house one last time. The lights were still on. I could see my father pacing in the living room, waving his arms. I started the car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. I just knew I wasn't paying for that house anymore. But I was wrong about one thing. The war wasn't over. It had just begun, and they were going to play dirty. I stayed in a cheap motel off the highway for 2 days. I spent most of that time staring at the ceiling, replaying the party in my head. I had embarrassed them. I had exposed the lie. But knowing my father, he wasn't sitting at home feeling guilty. He was plotting. He was spinning the narrative. He was probably telling the neighbors I had a mental breakdown. On the 3rd day, I decided to go back to the house. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to get a few boxes of my old things from the attic, my yearbooks, my debate trophies, and a quilt my grandmother made me. They were the only things in that house that actually belonged to me. I drove over at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I knew Dad would be at work, which usually meant driving around pretending to have meetings, and Mom would be grocery shopping. The house looked quiet. The party tent was gone. The lawn was pristine. I walked up the front steps. I felt a familiar heaviness in my chest, the ghost of being a scared little girl. But I pushed it down. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key. It was the same key I'd had since I was 16. It had a little plastic cover on it that had turned yellow with age. I slid the key into the lock. It went in halfway and stopped. I frowned. I jiggled it. Maybe it was just sticky. I pushed harder. It wouldn't go in. I pulled it out and looked at the lock. It looked shiny.
New.
My stomach dropped. They had changed the locks. It had been less than 72 hours. They hadn't wasted a second. They had locked me out of the house I had paid for. I knocked. "Mom," I called out.
"Dad."
No answer. I knocked harder. I started pounding on the wood. "Open the door. I know someone is in there." I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps. The door opened a crack. The chain was still on. A face appeared in the gap. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Dad. It was Caleb. He looked disheveled. He was wearing a bathrobe, holding a bowl of cereal. He looked at me through the crack like I was a solicitor trying to sell him magazines. "What do you want, Avery?" he asked. His mouth was full. "I want to come in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My key doesn't work." "Yeah," Caleb said, swallowing. "Dad had a locksmith come yesterday. Security reasons." "Security reasons?" I laughed, but it sounded like a bark. "I'm your sister, Caleb, not a burglar." "Dad said you're unstable," Caleb recited, like he was reading from a script. "He said after the scene you caused, we can't trust you around the property. He thinks you might try to damage the house out of spite." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. "I paid for this house, Caleb," I said slowly. "I paid for the roof over your head. I paid for the floor you're standing on." Caleb rolled his eyes. "So you keep saying, look, Avery, I don't know about the money stuff. That's between you and Dad. I just live here. And Dad said you aren't allowed inside." I looked past him. Through the crack in the door, I could see the hallway. There were boxes stacked against the wall. New boxes. "Are you moving things in?" I asked. Caleb smirked. A little smug lift of his lip.
"Yeah."
"I'm moving into the master bedroom. Mom and Dad are taking the guest room. Since it's my house now, Dad said I should have the big suite, to set up my studio." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were giving him the master bedroom, the room my parents had slept in for 30 years. They were shrinking themselves to make him bigger. "You can't do this," I whispered. "It's done," Caleb said. "Look, do you want me to call the police?" Dad said if you showed up and made trouble, I should call the cops. Trespassing, he called it.
"Trespassing."
"On my own investment. I just want my things," I said. "My yearbooks. Grandma's quilt." Caleb shrugged. "I think Mom put some stuff in trash bags in the garage. Or maybe she threw it out. We needed the space for my gym equipment." He started to close the door. "Caleb, wait." I jammed my foot in the door. He looked at my foot, then at my face. His eyes went cold. He wasn't my little brother anymore. He was a stranger who viewed me as an obstacle. "Go back to Chicago, Avery," he said. "Nobody wants you here." He kicked my foot away, hard. I stumbled back. The door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt slide home.
Click.
I stood on the porch. The silence of the neighborhood rushed back in. A bird was singing somewhere. A lawnmower buzzed in the distance. I looked at the closed door. I looked at the shiny new lock. For years, I had thought that if I just paid enough, if I sacrificed enough, the door would open. I thought I could buy my way into their hearts. I realized then that the door had never been locked because of money. It was locked because they didn't want me inside. I walked back to my car. I didn't cry. The tears were gone. They had dried up in the motel room. Instead of sadness, I felt a cold, hard clarity. It settled in my chest like a stone. They wanted to fight? They wanted to talk about security and property?
Fine.
I wasn't going to use emotions anymore. Emotions were messy. Emotions got you hurt. I was going to use the law. I didn't go back to the motel. I went to a FedEx office store. I had my laptop in my bag. I found a corner desk, paid for the Wi-Fi, and opened my laptop. I pulled up everything. My bank statements from the last 5 years. The transfer confirmations. The emails to the mortgage company. The text messages from mom acknowledging the payments. The digital receipts I had obsessively saved just in case. I printed it all. The printer whirred and hummed, spitting out page after page of evidence. It was a thick stack, warm to the touch. It weighed about 2 pounds. 2 pounds of proof that I wasn't crazy. I put the stack in a crisp manila folder. Then I called Uncle Harold. "I'm ready," I said when he picked up. "Good," he said. "Meet me at 200 State Street, Suite 404. Jordan is expecting you." Jordan Fields wasn't what I expected. I expected a shark, someone loud and aggressive like my father. But Jordan was quiet. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a very clean desk. He shook my hand firmly. "Harold told me the basics," he said. "But I need to see the paper." I handed him the folder. He sat down and opened it. The room was silent for 20 minutes. The only sound was the rustling of paper and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Uncle Harold sat in the corner, reading a magazine, looking entirely unbothered. I watched Jordan's face. He didn't frown.
He didn't gasp.
He just read. He was a professional. He was looking for facts. Finally, he closed the folder. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth. "Well," Jordan said, "this is very interesting. Can they do it?" I asked. My voice shook a little. "Can they just take it?" "Your father thinks he can," Jordan said calmly. "He thinks that because his name is on the original deed, he owns the property. And normally, he would be right. In a standard mortgage situation, if you pay someone else's debt, it's considered a gift unless there's a written contract stating otherwise." My heart sank. "So, I lost." I said normally, Jordan corrected. He put his glasses back on. "But your father made a mistake. A very arrogant mistake." He pulled a document out of his own drawer. 10 years ago, your father put the house into a family trust. He did it to protect the asset from potential lawsuits related to his business. Harold is the trustee. Your father is the beneficiary, but Jordan tapped the paper with his finger. The trust has a specific clause regarding capital contribution. It says that any beneficiary or family member who contributes more than 50% of the equity into the property is entitled to a proportional share of ownership held in trust, unless waived in writing. I blinked. "What does that mean in English?" Jordan smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "It means that the moment you paid off that mortgage, which constituted nearly 80% of the current value of the home given their refinancing history, you didn't just pay a bill. You bought equity." He looked me right in the eye. "You didn't pay for them, Avery. You bought it from them. They just didn't realize it." So, I sat forward. "I own the house." "Technically, the trust owns the house," Jordan said. "But you are now the majority stakeholder in the trust, which means you control the asset. Your father can't give the house to Caleb because it's not his to give. He owns about 20%. You own 80%. I sat back in the chair. The air rushed out of me. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't the invisible child begging for scraps. I was the majority shareholder. "What do we do?" I asked. Jordan leaned forward. "We don't sue them. Not yet. Lawsuits are expensive and slow. We simply enforce the terms of the trust. We file a notice of interest with the county clerk. We freeze the title so they can't transfer it. And then we serve them with an eviction notice for the unauthorized occupant. Caleb. I thought about Caleb laughing at me through the crack in the door. I thought about him kicking my foot. I thought about the gym equipment in the master bedroom. Do it, I said. Jordan nodded and started typing. Uncle Harold stood up and walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. You know, Harold said softly, I told your father years ago that he was underestimating you. He said you were soft. He said you just wanted to please people. I looked at the stack of papers on the desk, the evidence of my 5 years of silence. I was soft, I said. I wanted them to love me. I thought if I suffered enough, they would care. And now, Harold asked. I stood up. I felt taller. My spine felt like it was made of steel. Now I don't care if they love me, I said. I just want them to pay me what I'm worth. We walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sunlight. The city looked different. It didn't look like the place where I was a victim anymore. It looked like a map, and I finally knew how to navigate it. I had spent my whole life waiting for my father to give me permission to exist. I was done waiting. I had the receipts. I had the law. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the noise. I was ready to make some of my own. Jordan, I asked before I got in my car. When do we tell them? We don't, Jordan said. We let them find out. There's a family cookout coming up, isn't there? Harold mentioned it. The Lake Ontario cookout, I said. It's this weekend. Perfect, Jordan said.
Go.
Act normal. Let them brag. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. I'll have the papers ready by then. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had felt in weeks. I'll be there, I said. I got in my car and drove away. I wasn't driving a getaway car anymore. I was driving a tank. The Monroe Family Annual Cookout was an institution. It was held at a rented pavilion by Lake Ontario. It was the one day a year where my father pretended to be the patriarch of a happy, extended clan. I pulled into the gravel parking lot. My stomach gave a little lurch, but I touched the manila folder on the passenger seat. My armor. I got out. I was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt. I didn't dress up. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I walked toward the pavilion. The smell of charcoal and burnt hot dogs hung in the air. I could hear the slap of waves against the rocks and the murmur of 50 people talking. When I stepped onto the concrete slab of the pavilion, the conversation didn't stop, but the temperature seemed to drop.
People noticed me.
My Aunt Linda paused mid-bite of her potato salad. My cousin Lena elbowed her husband. They all knew about the scene at the house party. They had heard my father's version, that I was jealous, unstable, hysterical. I walked straight to the cooler, grabbed a soda, and leaned against a wooden pillar. My father was at the grill, flipping burgers.
He saw me.
His spatula froze in midair. He looked at Mom, who was organizing plastic forks nearby. She looked terrified. Dad marched over to me, wiping his hands on his apron. I didn't think you have the nerve to show up, he said, his voice low and menacing. After the stunt you pulled? I'm still part of the family, aren't I? I asked calmly. And I like burgers. You are hanging by a thread, Avery, he hissed. I'm meeting with the title company on Monday. We're transferring the deed to Caleb. It's done. So don't make a scene today, or I swear I will have you escorted out. You're transferring the deed? I asked, raising my voice just enough so the nearby tables could hear. Keep your voice down, he snapped. But Dad, I said, opening the manila folder I was holding. You can't transfer what you don't own. Caleb walked up, holding a beer. Give it a rest, Avery. You lost. Get over it. I pulled a single document from the folder. It was the notice of interest that Jordan had filed yesterday. It had the official county stamp on it. I placed it on the picnic table next to the ketchup and mustard. What is this? Dad asked, staring at it. Read it, I said. He picked it up. His eyes scanned the paper. I watched the color drain from his face. It went from angry red to a sickly gray. This is nonsense, he stammered. This is legal mumbo-jumbo. Actually, Uncle Harold's voice came from the next table. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. It's standard trust law, Thomas. The whole pavilion went quiet. The wind off the lake seemed to stop. The trust documents are clear, Harold said, walking over to join us. Avery contributed 80% of the equity. Therefore, the trust holds the property for her benefit, not yours. And certainly not Caleb's. You're lying, Caleb shouted. He looked like a child whose toy was being taken away. Dad, tell them they're lying. Dad crumbled the paper in his hand. I am the head of this family. I decide who gets the house. I paid the down payment 30 years ago. And then you spent it, I said. My voice was steady. You spent the equity on bad investment. You spent it on Caleb's mistakes. You drained the house dry. I filled it back up. I paid for the walls. I paid for the roof. I paid for the ground you're standing on. You did it out of love, Mom cried out, stepping forward. You did it to help us. How can you use that against us now? I looked at my mother. For the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt exhaustion. I did do it out of love, Mom, I said. But you didn't take it as love. You took it as permission to erase me. You took my money and gave the credit to Dad and the reward to Caleb. That's not family. That's theft. The relatives were whispering now. The silence was broken. Is that true? Cousin Lena asked, standing up. Did Avery pay the mortgage? Of course not. Dad shouted, but his voice cracked. He looked small. I have the bank statements right here, I said, tapping the folder. 60 months of payments. From my account. Does anyone want to see? No one moved. They didn't need to see. They could see the truth in my father's sweating face. They could see it in the way Caleb was looking at his shoes. This isn't over, Dad whispered to me. You think a piece of paper makes you the owner? I will fight you. I will drain you dry in court. You can't afford court, Dad, I said simply. You can't even afford the mortgage. I took the folder back. I picked up my soda. Enjoy the burgers, I said to the group. I walked back to my car. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel the shift in the air. The king was naked, and everyone had finally seen it. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a knock on the door. 2 days after the cookout, I sat in a rental car parked down the street from the house. I wasn't alone. I was with a process server named Mike. You ready? Mike asked. Do it, I said. Mike got out of the car. He walked up the driveway. He carried a clipboard and a very official-looking envelope. I watched through binoculars. It felt like a spy movie, but it was just my sad reality. Mike knocked. Dad opened the door. He looked tired. He hadn't shaved. Mike said a few words and handed Dad the envelope. Dad tried to refuse it, waving his hands. Mike simply dropped the envelope at his feet, said something else, and walked away. Dad stood on the porch, staring at the envelope. It was the formal eviction notice and the restraining order regarding the dissipation of assets. Basically, get out of the house and don't sell anything inside it. But the real blow came an hour later. A tow truck turned onto the street. It wasn't a normal tow truck. It was a repo truck. See, in my deep dive into the finances, I had found something else. Caleb's new luxury SUV wasn't bought. It was leased, and Dad had co-signed for it. But since Dad had stopped paying the mortgage 5 years ago, his credit was actually terrible. He had used the house equity line to pay the lease. Since Jordan had frozen the trust assets, the automatic payments to the car dealership had bounced. The driver backed up to Caleb's shiny black car parked in the driveway. I saw the curtains twitch. Caleb flew out of the front door. Hey, what are you doing? The driver didn't even look up. He was hooking the chains to the bumper. Bank sent me, the driver said. Payment default. My dad paid it. Caleb screamed. He ran back toward the house. Dad. They're taking the car. Dad came out. He was still holding the eviction papers. He looked at the tow truck. He looked at Caleb screaming. He looked at the house. He looked defeated. There was no yelling this time. No grand speeches about being the man of the house. He just stood there in his slippers and watched the truck lift the car into the air. That was the moment the lie finally died. I got out of my rental car and walked up the street. Uncle Harold pulled up in his sedan right behind me. We walked together. When we reached the driveway, Caleb was crying. Actually crying. How am I supposed to get to the gym? He whined. How am I supposed to go to dates? This is embarrassing. You could take the bus, I said. Caleb spun around. You did this. No, I said. Math did this. You spent money you didn't have. I looked at Dad. He was leaning against the porch railing. He looked old. We have 30 days, Dad said. His voice was hollow. The paper says we have 30 days to vacate. That's generous, I said. Considering you tried to lock me out of my own property. Where will we go? Mom asked, stepping out onto the porch. She looked frail. Avery, we have nowhere to go. I found a rental for you, I said. I pulled a flyer out of my bag. It's a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side. It's clean. It's affordable. I paid the first 6 months of rent for you. I handed the flyer to Mom. An apartment? Dad scoffed. I'm not living in an apartment. I need a yard. I need an office. You don't have a job, Dad, I said gently. You don't need an office. And you can't afford a yard. And what about me? Caleb asked. Where's my room? I looked at my brother, the boy who had never been told no. The apartment has 2 bedrooms, I said. One for Mom and Dad. One for, well, maybe storage. You're 31, Caleb. You're not on the lease. What? Caleb's jaw dropped. You're making me homeless? I'm making you an adult, I said. Figure it out. I turned to Dad. I'm taking the keys now, I said. I'm changing the locks back today. You can stay for the 30 days to pack, but I will be coming and going as I please. And if I see one item missing that belongs to the trust, one painting, one piece of silver, I will call the police and press charges for theft. Do you understand? Dad looked at me. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me, but then his shoulders slumped. He looked at the ground. I understand, he whispered. I didn't hear you, I said. He looked up. His eyes were wet. I understand, he said louder. It wasn't an apology. I knew I would never get an apology, but it was a surrender. And that was enough. The 30 days passed quickly. They moved out on a rainy Saturday. I didn't help them pack. I sat on the porch swing and drank tea. I watched Caleb shove his clothes into black trash bags. He had found a room in a shared house near the university with 3 other guys. He was furious, muttering under his breath, but he was going. I watched Dad carry out his awards, cheap plastic trophies from sales contests 30 years ago. He looked smaller without the house around him. The house had been his shell, his armor. Without it, he was just a grumpy old man with bad credit. Mom hugged me before she got into the moving van. I hope you're happy, Avery, she said. Her voice was sad. You tore the family apart. I looked at her. I touched her cheek. No, Mom, I said. I just turned on the lights. The family was already broken. You just couldn't see it in the dark. She pulled away, wiped her eyes, and got in the van. They drove away. I was alone. I walked back into the house. It echoed. It smelled like dust and old arguments. I walked into the living room. I stood in the spot where Dad used to stand and give his speeches. I felt light. The next few weeks were busy. I hired a contractor. We ripped up the carpet in the living room and found beautiful hardwood floors underneath. We painted over the beige walls with bright, clean white. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, the room they had tried to give to Caleb. I painted it a soft, calming blue. I turned it into my office. I put my desk right in front of the window where I could see the street. I went into my old room, the invisible child room. I stripped the wallpaper. I turned it into a guest room, a room for friends, a room for people who would actually appreciate being there. I didn't keep the house as a shrine to the past. I changed it. I made it mine. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I was hanging a picture over the fireplace. It was a photo I had taken of myself on a trip to the mountains, a trip I finally took with the money I wasn't sending to them anymore. In the photo, I was smiling, a real smile. The doorbell rang. I froze. Was it them? I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Uncle Harold. He was holding a bottle of champagne. I opened the door. Housewarming, he asked, grinning.
Come in, I said.
We sat on my new couch. The house was warm. It was peaceful. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells. How are they? I asked. I hadn't spoken to them since the move. They're fine, Harold said. Your dad complains about the neighbors in the apartment complex. Mom watches a lot of TV. Caleb got a job, believe it or not. He's bartending, says he hates it, but he's paying his rent. Good, I said. And I meant it. You know, Harold said, looking around. Your father told everyone you stole this house. He tells anyone who will listen that you tricked him. I know, I said. I took a sip of champagne. Let him tell his story. I know the truth. Does it bother you? Harold asked. That he'll never admit it? I looked at the fire crackling in the fireplace. I thought about the girl who used to eat grilled cheese sandwiches alone in the kitchen, waiting for someone to remember her birthday. No, I said. It doesn't bother me, because I didn't do this to get his approval. I did it to get my life back. I leaned back, feeling the solid wood of the floor beneath my feet. I didn't lose a family, Uncle Harold, I said softly. I stopped renting my piece to one. Harold clinked his glass against mine.
To ownership, he said.
To ownership, I replied. The house was silent around us, but it wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was the silence of a sanctuary. If you are reading this, and you are the one holding the weight of a family that only takes, if you are the one writing the checks, fixing the messes, and swallowing the insults, listen to me. Silence is not love. Suffering in the shadows is not honor. You can put the burden down. You can change the
locks.
Permission to be happy isn't something they give you. It's something you take. And once you take it, never give it back.